Hello, everyone. I'm OG Strogatz. I'm one of the organizers of Lift Up Public Schools and a member of the school board project team of the American Association of University Women, California. And I'll say a little more about each of these two co-host organizations in just a moment. It is my great delight to welcome each of you to the first webinar in the Public Education Webinar Series, a set of 3 sessions held tonight and on March 26th and April 23rd, focused collectively on what our local school districts and school boards do, how they do it, and why their work is so crucial to the vitality of our communities and our democracy. As I mentioned, the series is co-hosted by Lift Up Public Schools, or LUPS, and the American Association of University Women California, or AAUW California. LUPS is a vibrant, all-volunteer coalition of nonpartisan and partisan grassroots groups from Contra Costa and Alameda counties, launched in April of 2024 to champion excellent, safe, and welcoming public education for all. AAUW California is the state's affiliate of the National AAUW organization, founded in 1881 and dedicated to equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. One of AAUW California's public policy priorities is equal access to quality public education for all students. Our two organizations look forward to the synergistic impact of collaborating to support public education as it continues to strive to realize its best aspirations. I'll cover just a few administrative items before turning to tonight's program. Please use the chat function in Zoom for any technical issues or questions, for instance, Zoom audio or video challenges. Our tech support team will aim to address these promptly. Please use the Q&A function to post any questions you may have for our moderator or panelists. We will hold your questions on tonight's topic until the moderator and the panelists have completed their opening discussion, and we'll do our best to help ensure that all your questions are addressed. It is important for me to note upfront that due to AAUW California's status as a 501c4 nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and because the Lift Up Public Schools Coalition includes 501c3 nonpartisan and partisan organizations, the discussions in this webinar series cannot include endorsement or support for one party over another. Accordingly, we also cannot address audience questions framed in a context that supports one party over another. For example, if you want to ask a question about the federal government, please ask about the current administration or the congressional majority, as opposed to the Republican administration or Republican majority. And we thank you in advance for your understanding. All right, on to tonight's discussion, School Districts 101, how they work. We all have fifth row center seats to listen to and learn from a discussion that will bring together a very diverse mix of perspectives about the work of school districts and school boards. And it is my honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Annie Karuga. Annie is an award-winning civic leader, a Lift Up Public Schools leader, and a UC Berkeley graduate. Annie serves in various roles within the Democratic Party, including recording secretary of the Alameda County Democratic Party and chair of the Young Democrats of America LGBTQ+ caucus. Outside of the party, Annie is active in the community and organizes around a range of policy issues, from environmental justice and the Climate Superfund to housing affordability and tenants' rights. Annie, over to you.
All right. Wonderful, and thank you for that introduction, OG. Now I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists. So first is Hayward School Board Trustee Austin Bruckner Carrillo. Austin was elected to the Hayward Unified School District Board, supported by a strong worker-led progressive coalition with many key endorsements. Having experienced housing insecurity firsthand, he now works in local government and leads Alameda County's longest-running LGBTQ pride organization. Next is San Ramon Valley Unified Superintendent CJ Kamek. CJ began serving as superintendent of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board in 2024, bringing over a decade of experience in Bay Area education leadership. He previously served as the superintendent of both Fremont and Martinez Unified School Districts and assistant superintendent in San Ramon Valley Unified. He holds degrees from St. Mary's College and was named 2024's Region 6 Superintendent of the Year. Third, we have the Vice President of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers, Regina Chagoya. Regina is a 17-year elementary educator, Emeryville Unified School District Board trustee, and labor leader. She serves as the Vice President of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers and advocates statewide and federally for student funding and affordable housing. And last but certainly not least, we have community activist and pro-public education parent Ganesh Balamitrian. Ganesh is a senior marketing executive at a leading Silicon Valley-based technology company. He holds degrees from the University of Mumbai's Sardar Patel College of Engineering, Arizona State University, and the Indian Institute of Management. He has served in leadership roles, including treasurer, for over a decade with Vibna, a nonprofit advancing systemic solutions for children in India. So let's give all of these panelists a virtual round of applause and thank them so much for agreeing to participate in tonight's panel. Now to get into the discussion, our first topic will be about both district and board governance, right? How our K through 12 public schools are run, how they're governed, and how decisions about them are made. So first, we'll start with a little bit of a basic question for any of the panelists. I'd love for all of you, not at once, but all of you to jump in with your kind of insight and experience. So to start, there's multiple elected roles that have to do with our K through 12 schools. There's the local school districts, the county board of education, even the state superintendent. So start off, again, a little bit basic and in a nutshell. Can you tell us what is the role of the local school districts and the local school boards? And whoever wants to start can start.
Well, I'm happy to start. I'm incredibly shy. I'm just kidding. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and it's a pleasure to be part of this talented panel. I think when I look at the question of what is our role of a local school district and the local board within that, at the local level, our job is to provide excellent TK through 12 education, including in the special education sector, students who sometimes qualify for services before the age of transitional kindergarten or after the age of typical graduation, 18 to 22 years old for some of our students. In that, we are responsible for providing that comprehensive education program. Over the years, the amount of things that we're responsible for have increased significantly, in part because it's a need that our youth have. In terms of what the board does in that role, from my perspective as a superintendent, the board sets the budget, the policies, and the overall direction of the local school district. And the superintendent has the responsibility for carrying out those policies, for implementing the budget, and carrying forward the goals and directions of the district as established by the board.
All right.
I like
Wonderful. And
yeah.
thank you for that. Yes, go ahead.
And CJ may have mentioned this, but it's also important to remember that the school board also employs the superintendent, which is, a big deal. And I like to frame the school board members as like the cheerleaders of the district. They're the face, they're the leaders of the community, and speak just kind of constantly uplifting the district and the services the district offers. They're the public face, right? And it's also good to know that school board members, they could range from 3 board members to 7. And so each district has a different number of school board members, but it is the largest elected representation of leadership in the state of California. So if you do the math, 3 to 7 times how many districts are in our state of California, that's a lot of folks representing public schools. And also they ensure accountability, to the public, given its public school systems, creating a supportive environment for the staff, not just teachers and students, but also our district staff as well. And so there's also those different components to being a board member.
I would just add the role of a board member is really to also work between our labor partners and our community, our families, and then our staff to help facilitate and to kind of hear all sides. School boards also are tasked with making sure that we meet a minimum threshold for state reserves in order to maintain local control. And what that means is the folks that you elect, either by small district elections, local neighborhoods, or across the entire district of a school district, as I was elected, to really make sure that we are serving our students and our families.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that school districts aren't necessarily always TK through 12. There are sometimes elementary school districts. I come from a unified school district, which means that it covers the entire gamut. But your particular school district could be covering a smaller section, or it could be broken up into elementary, middle, high, etc. So that depends on the structure based on where you are living and what your local community is doing.
Yeah. So election of school board members and kind of deciding who is on the school board has been brought up a few times. So let's go there. So I know lots of people have lots of different ideas about school district elections and sometimes questions about school board elections as well. So I'd love to throw it back to y'all to talk a little bit more about how do people end up on the school board? What's the process of school board elections?
So I'm happy to go first. I was elected in the last November election in 2024, and I sit in the seat that for about 20 years belonged to individuals who would demonize our staff and our families for supporting the law in terms of talking about LGBTQ curriculum, safe and inclusive schools. And so for the first time in 2 decades, Hayward School Board has the highest percentage of LGBT school board members within Alameda County. And so there's a tone, I think, that school boards are only for parents, or they're only for people who have a certain perspective. And really what I believe school boards are is they should be a diverse reflection of the community. You want to make sure that as much as possible that folks that are on your board are able to complement each other, but also able to see the issue from different sides. I believe every school board should have, you got to have parents, you got to have educators, you have to have union organizers. And then if you're a lawyer, that's always amazing. But really, school boards are for everyday folks. And I think the most important part is that the school board should not select their colleagues. That is for our staff, our students, our families, and our community to help identify candidates to run.
I just want to transition. I was actually appointed to be Emeryville school board member in 2020 when someone moved out of the community. And as all you recall, 2020, huge time in our country or in our planet. So many folks in Emeryville decided to either move back to the East Coast or wherever their families were, or just get out of the city at the time. We had a wave of residents leave the East Bay area in 2020. And one of those folks was a board member. And I was walking my dog, and Audrey Miles, a retired teacher from Emeryville, who was also my neighbor, reached out to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing lately?" I'm like, teaching from my, teaching from my living room. And she's like, "There's a seat open. You should apply to be a board member." And so speaking of community, right, Austin, right, this is my neighbor, also, a resident and a teacher in the district. Whereas I was a teacher in the neighboring district. I'm a teacher in Berkeley Unified, but I'm a resident in Emeryville. And, just a neighbor, literally, we're just walking our dogs, 6 feet away with masks on. And I was invited to do this. And statistically, women tend to be asked to run, so that's another statistic of who runs and who doesn't. So women statistically are usually asked to run for something, and I was asked to apply. So I finished someone's 2-year terms, and then I ran, and I'm wrapping up my 4-year of my first full term, and I plan to run again. But anywho, so that's how I became a school board member.
I can bring a third perspective. I also ran for school board in my school district and actually lost my election, but I can speak to the process itself. It's a nonpartisan election, and that means you're not tied to a party or anything like that. There is no primaries from my experience. Everybody who files to run is on the November ballot normally. And there is a filing deadline. I just had to go to the county and file the papers by that particular deadline. I did have to have an official treasurer who would maintain all of the accounts for the election. But by and large, raise money, campaign, pull a team together, and actually contest the election. And we went through the democratic process, and it was wonderful. It was hotly contested, but it was a good experience, and I would certainly encourage people to throw your hat in if you are interested in serving on the school district board.
Yeah. So running for office is definitely one way that community members or teachers or labor leaders can get involved. In fact, we have examples of multiple of them on this panel tonight. But that's certainly not the only way that members of the community and members of the public can get involved. So to expand this a little bit further and kind of build on the discussion we're having, what are some other ways that members of the public can get involved in school district governance or governance of either their school district, and just be really active participants in the decisions that the district is making?
I think one way that members of the community can become involved in their school district in an official manner is a lot of school districts will have committees that need community representation. Some of those committees have more formality than others, but those committees would include your LCAP committee, your local control accountability plan. School districts may have a committee related to safety. There are usually curriculum advisory councils or curriculum committees. And then on the finance side, there's often committees for oversight of parcel tax dollars. Those are all great ways to get engaged with your school district, especially to understand the governance. And then I think the other suggestion I would offer is, I think really attending board meetings, whether in person or if they're streamed, is a great way to be involved. Everything we do has to be done in public. And so it is all out there for consumption, which is always a challenging circumstance for elected officials, because as superintendent, I don't get to meet with my board of education as a whole and review how all of the meetings going to go. Everything happens out in the open, and that's the way it should be because we're funded publicly. So I think committee work or attendance at board meetings, both are great options. And if you're attending the board meetings, you'll likely see agenda items about potential committee options as well.
Superintendent, I want to thank you for attending a board meeting. That is, it's the easiest thing that you can do. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to identify why you're there. The idea that school board meetings happen across the country. We had a school board meeting last night, went till 1 a.m. And to know that they're operating with no one in the audience, no one paying attention to what is happening. That is the basic checks and balance that we need from the community. Things that you can do there a little more action is participate with your local PTA, get involved at local sites, pay attention to the 3 little words next to someone's name when they're on the ballot, your ballot designation. Everyone is an educator, but they've never stepped foot in a classroom. So make sure that you are electing the right people to school board, and then you are holding them accountable by going to a school board meeting.
I'd like to speak more on what CJ was mentioning, one of the committees being if your district has a parcel tax committee. I strongly encourage folks to be involved in that, because so much of the work, the important work, especially in the state of California, is funding, and it helps you get an idea of how some schools are or aren't funded. So there's the PTA, right, where it's like fundraising, but then if there's a parcel tax, that's like deep dive and learning just how, for example, I'm a school board member in Emeryville Unified. We're tiny but mighty. We're technically considered a small school district, but we're in like an urban region. In fact, over 55% of the school districts in California are considered small school districts. But anywho, so in 2014, we passed Measure K, and we strongly rely on our volunteer committee members to meet twice or 3 times a year to just do some checks and balance. And it's like, I think it's like 15 cents per square footage, and those funds go to our school district. Another opportunity is when these parcel tax are up and they're back on the ballot, to get involved and volunteer and join the campaign committee. That's a great way to also. So if you're more of an extrovert and you want to meet people, go door to door and advocate for this parcel tax, like we could definitely use you. We definitely need boots on the ground. As the vice president of Berkeley Federation of Teachers, the city of Berkeley has a long history of supporting progressive measures. And so we just passed one, actually a number of measures. We have some bonds for facilities, and we also have a measure that pays for like 80% of our like programs. And so that's a huge percentage. And we rely heavily on our parcel tax. And so we get them renewed. And that's actually how we meet lots of strong community members and families and parents and guardians and say, hey, would you be interested in running for school board? So from my seat as a vice president of the teacher union, I work closely with these parcel tax because they fund our students' programs and our staff. And then I also keep an eye out on which community members are being involved and put the pitch out there and like, hey, would you be interested in running? Because running those kind of parcel tax campaigns, it's the same work to run for a school board campaign. And we could talk more about that later, but it's transferable is what I'm trying to say. So yeah.
I was just going to, again, add that a really great way for parents and community members to get involved with the district is to try and serve in district-wide committees. In Fremont, we have several committees like the Budget, Finance, and Audit Advisory Committee, or Facilities Advisory Committee, Student Wellness Committee, Technology and Innovation. This is especially important to note if, like me, you didn't actually grow up in the US and weren't familiar with the public school system. Many of us, parents included, think that the only way to participate in school system is to volunteer in your own child's classroom, and that we don't really need to be involved if we don't have children in the local public school. That's not true. District committees are a great way to participate and learn about school district, funding issues, student issues, engagement with labor groups. And if you've never been part of one of these, my experience has been that the community is actually very welcoming and allows you to ease in and contribute. Also, the board meetings are public. They're live streamed, at least in our school district, and agendas and minutes are posted. And these are a great place to learn about school board issues. There's also a place where you can make live comments and meet other engaged community members.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of those insights. I know attending board meetings has been mentioned a few times, so let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. As has been mentioned, sometimes board meetings have lots of like technical acronyms going on. Sometimes they take a long time. Sometimes they even go till 1 a.m. And so sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated maybe to go to their first board meeting if they haven't done it yet. So with your kind of insight and experience, and imagine all of you have seen many, many, many school board meetings. What are some of the things that you would say people should know, members of the public should really know about before they attend their first board meeting? For instance, like how to read an agenda, kinds of items that would be important. What do you really want the public to know to feel empowered before they attend a board meeting?
I would say, don't be afraid to ask how public comment works within school districts. While there are best practices, every school district seems to do that process different. And so really just making sure that you're aware if you do want to say something, when do you need to fill out a card? Do you need to fill out a card? Where do you pick it up? Where do you put it? How do you document the right agenda item number on the card? Those kind of mechanics.
Yeah, I can also add there that maybe repeating myself a little bit, but yeah, you walk into a school board meeting, it feels like everybody knows what's going on, but that's totally fine. Take your time to settle in. And as Austin was saying, there's usually a card to fill out if you want to give comments. The other thing to kind of know is whether you're commenting on what topic on the agenda. So there's a timing. If you want to speak on a particular topic, you want to go and speak right before the topic is being presented. And also the board members who are listening to your comments aren't required to respond. They may choose to respond, but That's not an expectation. So don't expect that if you go in and make a comment that they will immediately respond to your thing, but they will take it into account as they go in through their further discussions. If you look at the agenda and you see something that's really close to your heart, Austin was mentioning LGBTQ issues, like if that's something that you care about, or you care about funding and there is a topic on the agenda that's close to that, feel free to go up there and speak your mind. It's okay to be off topic sometimes. It's okay to not be perfect in your comments, but definitely participate in a few meetings and you'll be pretty good at it.
Yeah, I would want to tell folks definitely try to eat before going to a board meeting because there's no snacks. So definitely like come on a full stomach or bring some snacks. Anywho, but I would also encourage the community or folks who either work or have children in the school district to come and just speak on something that worked and that you like and that your children thrived in. I mean, board members can use to hear some good news. I think we often hear, this deficit mindset of what's not working, what we need more of, but we all have full-time jobs and we do other things and then we come to this meeting, but the more you get a snapshot or look through a window of how your child's experience is going, or you as an employer, you're thriving, you're seeing your students grow and learn in something, we encourage folks to come and speak to that. It doesn't have to be the agenda item. It's just a comment, And it's also important to note that not all board meetings work the same way. In Berkeley, you make your public comments in the beginning and at the end. And in Emeryville, you make your comments after the agenda item. And so it's good to know how your school board meeting works in terms of public comment.
All right. So we're going to switch topics a little bit, still on governance and school districts and school boards. But lots of people aren't super sure, right, what the local district decides and what the state decides, where that overlap is, and who gets to decide what. So on matters of jurisdiction, can you speak to kind of what sorts of issues school districts have control over and what sorts of issues are decided by the state of California?
I would say it's a really good question, Annie, but it's really nuanced as well. So as an example, there are some things we have control over in terms of which curriculum we choose to adopt for an educational program. Yet in most grades, that curriculum has to be aligned with the standards as established by the state of California. So there is not as much local control as some may think. I think when I really look at a school district, what is our local jurisdiction is, what are our top priorities? What are the strategic directions that we choose for a school district? What are the goals and benchmarks that we're working to accomplish? And then I think another important part is you have discretion over where and how you spend your money in your budget. Your budget is a reflection of your priorities at the local level. That being said, there is a very large construct established by the state of California within the education code. And that's going to govern things like school student discipline. It's going to govern things like instructional minutes. So it's a really intricately woven design. And you really look for where you would like to have local control, but you have to stay within the boundaries established by the state.
Superintendent, I appreciate that. I think local school boards are also supposed to be representatives for the community that they serve. And I think often school board members forget, yes, you need to do the job that you are mandated to do to make sure that local control maintains in your district. There's also an opportunity to be an advocate for issues that are happening that may be within the jurisdiction of the city council or the local park district. For example, BART closing perhaps 20 plus stations and the impact that may have on students and families that we serve. Housing, workforce housing for our teachers, for our educators, for families. Those are not issues that are traditionally defined into the jurisdiction of the school board, but really I think we have an obligation to advocate for. And then in terms of holding up the requirements of state law about what we need to teach in our classroom, we also have an opportunity to make sure that as changes at the federal level take place, where they are getting it wrong, that we are preparing kids for a 21st century education, where they're able to enter the world kinder than the world that they're currently in.
Yeah, I like to speak on thanks, Austin and CJ. It's really great to have this space because we're all we do our work, but we do the same work, but not. So CJ brought up like, we're given things and we got to implement them, right? And Austin's like, yes, we're given things, but sometimes we could push, I don't push back, but advocate. I'll use the word, yeah, that's the word you use, advocate. So 3 prime examples, and I'm going to have folks nodding their heads here. 3 prime examples of the latest that we receive from the state, we as in public schools and public staff and whatnot. Dyslexia screening, that's required. That's just an example, and I'll go into details. Transitional kindergarten and cursive. Now we have to, as of early 2026, and we're laughing, right? Because it's like, these are just examples of, you're right, Austin, we do have like housing, right? And workforce housing, but then at the same time, we just have these like things that I described. I'm not saying they're good or bad. It's just the state wants it. We're required to do them. And it's our job to make sure that our districts can pay for these services because they're required. And so going back to the first one was like dyslexia screening. It's like, okay, kindergarten, first and second, it's required, go. From our perspective, it's like, do we have the staff for it? How are we going to fund for the training? Like, these are things that we have to grapple with and whatnot. Transitional kindergarten, the governor's like, all right, it's gonna be required transitional kindergarten for everyone. Okay, from our lens, it's like, do we have the facilities? Do we have the instructional aids to support the transitional kindergarten teachers who are going to be our TK teachers? Diapers changes. Like, so those are little things that we hear from, whether it's from parents who email us, labor partners who email us, or budget decisions that we have to make. And the last one was like cursive, so it's like, and then there's that, I think there's like a trend. California is one of 3 states that it's requiring that our instructors teach handwriting cursive in the classroom. So that you just get stuff like that thrown at you. And we're like, okay, we got to buy those cursive books, make sure we still have those pens and pencils. So there's those big picture things, right? Like workforce housing. And there's like the little things that add up and they cost. And so that's, I don't know, Annie, if I'm answering your question, but these are the things we have to grapple with.
I'll jump in. I think there's a lot of good stuff that the other panelists have spoken. One thing I wanted to kind of maybe take a little bit from where Austin was going with stuff is, as community members, we may want to watch what the school board is doing and what's happening inside of the school district itself, but it's equally important to understand what's happening at the state level. So if there are bills that are in discussion at the state level that are going to affect education in some way, and you're organizing with your community members, then you have the opportunity to reach out to your assembly members, to your senators, maybe sometimes even organize all the way to Sacramento, so that you can speak to those issues before they become law. Because once they become law, as CJ was saying, the school district is required to follow the law. But what can you do as community members to influence that law actually happening the way? If BART is looking at closing down stations, like, we may have to deal with the issues later, but can we get ahead of that problem as community members by engaging with the county, with the state, sometimes also with the federal government? There's federal funding that's involved that we should be talking to our leaders about, even at the federal level. And I think at every level of government, people who are serving should realize that education, public education, is important to the local community, and the local community is advocating for education at every level of government, not just at the local school board.
All right. Thank you so much for all of that wonderful insight. To wrap up this first part of the discussion about school district governance, I'll ask kind of one final, little bit more open-ended question. Is there anything that has not been said or talked about or mentioned yet that you think that people should know about either school district or school board governance?
I think the most important thing that a school board member can do is be out in the community, not just for the photo ops, but for the actual one-on-one conversations with with students, with families, with folks that work in classrooms every single day. I was honored to be unanimously supported by our labor partners. It's a partnership. I talk to our labor partners every single board meeting to hear their concerns about every item on the agenda. And that was a requirement on both of our parts, is that if I am taking your endorsement, if you are offering your endorsement, it's a two-way street in terms of a relationship that we need to work at every single day.
All right. And if no other panelists have kind of substantive things to say on this question, we absolutely can move on. We love a substantive and comprehensive discussion. So now we're going to switch topics a little bit and talk about district budgets and school board funding. I've seen in the Q&A some people are interested in this topic, and it's definitely a topic that comes up time and time again when we talk about school boards and school districts and what our schools can do and have capacity to do, and all of the like really important things about our school districts. So we're going to start off with a little bit what sounds like a simple question, but is in fact sometimes a bit more of a complicated question. Where does the money that funds our schools come from?
I'm happy to take a stab at that in the front end of this conversation, because I've been deeply involved in budgets in the 10 years I've been superintendent. What I think is important to note is we have in the state what we call the local control funding formula. And you'll oftentimes hear that referred to as LCFF, because there's nothing we love more in education than acronyms. So the local control funding formula sets for schools across the state the amount of money that's received per student. Within that formula, our youngest students have a certain amount that is allocated per student. Our middle school students a certain amount, our high school students a certain amount. I will stop here for a moment and just say, I think that funding schools based on tying a dollar amount to a student is fundamentally the wrong way to approach education. That being said, it's the model that exists currently. There's a base level amount that goes to every school district across the state. Let me rephrase that. Most school districts across the state. On top of the base amount, there is called the supplemental and the concentration grant. And that is for your unduplicated pupil percentage, what we call the UPP. Those are students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, meaning they might qualify for free and reduced lunch. Students who are foster youth and homeless. Students who are second language learners. The reason we call it a UPP under the state's formula is because if you had a student who is a foster youth and a second language learner, you can't count them twice. So for school districts, they get a supplemental amount for each student. The concentration amount comes into play if your UPP is 55% or higher, then you receive 65% of your base amount for each of those students. At the concentration level, you're going to receive a smaller percentage. So that happens across the state. When that formula is implemented, not every school district is going to receive the same amount of money. Our school district, San Ramon Valley, of about 1,000 school districts across the state, we fall in the bottom 4th% of funding in the LCFF model per student. In our county, you might see the range go from anywhere from, let's say for easy conversation's sake, $12,500 per student to another district in the same county receiving $16,400 per student. And that is largely going to be based on that UPP count for a district. I think another important component is, where does that money come from? So it's going to be a little bit different for each district. In our district, about 2/3 of our revenue based on the formula comes from local taxes. And the state of California fills in the rest of the amount until we get to the threshold defined by the formula. I'll close by saying I think there's one important exception to this, which is you have some districts who are what we call community funded or basic aid districts. In those districts, there's still the LCFF formula says how much money they should receive for funding. When their local tax dollars exceed that formula, that local school district gets to keep all of the money above the formula. So as an example, I know districts in the greater Bay Area that are community funded or what we call a basic aid district. where their tax revenue exceeds the local amount, and their per student funding level is upwards of $32,000 a student. So the LCFF formula is predicated on helping school districts with additional funding to support students who need additional structures of support to achieve high levels. We want all students to achieve high levels. I'll close by saying this. There's an important federal component as well, especially around special education. When the federal government passed laws for special education under the IDEA law, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, they promised to fund 40% of the cost of special education. In my career, 26 years in the business, I haven't seen it exceed 15%. For our district in San Ramon, the federal contribution covers about 9.5% of our special ed costs. To give you some numbers behind that, for our district, if the federal government made their promise, our total expenditure for special education is about $91 million. That means we would get $36 million, which we're basically not getting right now. And so that is a significant component of funding, because each school district contributes from their LCFF dollars to support the programs and services for special ed students, which we should do because those students deserve the proper education and programs, rightfully so. But the federal government has never held up their end of the promise from a funding perspective for those programs. And I'll yield my time. Sorry for going so long.
Right.
Yeah, so I wanted to add about the taxes. It's, state of California, you have in CJ briefly talked about this. We have the income tax increase for high income taxpayers. And back in 2012, this was called Prop 30. And there was renewed Prop 55, not 50, Prop 55. Yes, Prop 55 2016. And maybe you've been approached by someone with a petition for what we're calling the millionaire's tax to continue this funding source. It funds public schools, healthcare, Medi-Cal, community colleges, universities, but a majority K-12 public schools. And so the goal is to get it on the ballot this year because it actually expires 2030. So in the event it doesn't pass, then we could continue it. But it's just the base funds, just the base that we're trying to get it to renewed. So that's important to know. So maybe some of you remember it, but it's coming back. Yeah.
Yes, and for the benefit of our community, or for the benefit of our panelists who may be tuning in from other parts of California, CJ is a superintendent in Contra Costa County. So if you hear he was talking about his county, it's Contra Costa County, a county in the East Bay of the Bay Area of California. And Austin, I see that you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Most school districts have a 3% state requirement for a reserve, which means you need to keep that much money in essentially a savings account to make sure that you're able to meet the basic education that you will need in between different influxes of cash periods. I think it's also important to note that there's parcel taxes, which fund programs and people, and bond dollars, which fund building of buildings and construction related items. Since we fund schools through average daily attendance, things that take away from funding for schools is chronic absenteeism, which is students who are absent 10% or more of their particular school year. Even just a slight decrease, meaning that there's more kids, is a slight decrease in chronic absenteeism is a huge amount of money that school districts would see. Things that also take away school funding are charter schools, diverts students from local public schools into institutions that are inherently, dare I say, racist in the structure of how they recruit students. And really what they do is pick the most engaged parents who are able to really be there every single day for their kids. And what we find is they turn away students with disabilities. They turn away foster care kids, homeless kids, Black and brown students. They have higher rates of school suspensions and behavioral discipline issues. And every single year, a pre-approved charter school, which local school districts approve, automatically is eligible for a 10% increase in the number of seats that they're able to provide for students. So it would go 600 students this year to 660 the following year, and then another 10% increase. And so when we talk about declining enrollment, charter schools are a large part of that.
And if I can add on to that, Austin, a bit, you touched on something I wanted to bring up, which was declining enrollment. So if you're following headlines across the state, or in particular across the Bay Area and Northern California, you're seeing so many districts having to make budget reductions. And it seems to be all happening within kind of a 24 month window. And that's not because all of those districts have made bad financial decisions, in my humble opinion. It's because the structure of how we fund schools needs to be reconstructed. In particular, the impact of declining enrollment, which is happening in almost every school district across the state, because we have a historically low state and national birth rate. Declining enrollment hurts school districts from a funding perspective, because that local control funding formula that I mentioned earlier in my response is driven by, as Austin pointed out, your attendance rate, your average daily attendance. So between this year and next year, our school district projects to drop by about 700 students. For context, we have 28,000 students in our district right now. That means that when we get next year's funding formula, we will be getting the funding for far less students than we had previously. So we are automatically receiving less than we would expect to receive. As an example, the expected COLA for next year is 2.41%. When you account for declining enrollment, we won't see a 2.41% increase in revenue. We will probably see in our school district closer to a 1% increase in revenue. And that's because we'll be getting that amount over a smaller number of students. Another important thing that I would mention is Prop 98, because there's a significant thing happening at the state level right now. Prop 98 is the law for the state that says 40% of the state budget needs to go to education, what we call TK through 14, transitional kindergarten through 14, which is community college. In the current proposal from the governor for the state budget for education next year, they propose withholding $5.9 billion, which should be coming to school districts under Prop 98. So when you start talking in the billions, that sounds a little bit like monopoly money, and it's crazy. So for some additional context, for a school district like ours in San Ramon, with about 28,000 students, if they actually allocated that money, which they should be doing under the state constitution, that would mean $25 million for us that we should rightfully receive that we're not going to receive. So Prop 98 is a really critical factor. When it was implemented, that 40% was intended to be the floor, the base level amount that we could receive. Unfortunately, the state legislature has kind of treated it as a ceiling. So there's some real important state advocacy that needs to happen in that regard as well, because that withholding of the 5.9 billion is going to hurt school districts across the entire state of California.
Yes.
So if I may add, yeah, a lot of stuff has been covered, but I go back to CJ's first point, which is that the way we are funding schools is really problematic. And in fact, the thing that we end up doing with our public systems is we cut funding, then they are not able to serve as well as they should. And then we look at that and we go, oh, they're not serving as well, let's cut more funding. And it's like a spiral that a lot of our public systems go through, which is also happening in the school system. We need to be thinking, at least as community organizers and parents who are actively involved, we should be thinking of a right to education, which means that every child should be getting a great public education. And the school district, the state, plus the federal government should be providing the funding that is needed to make that happen. The school district gets funding from local. What's not enough should come from the state. And then whatever is the balance should be coming from the federal government. That should be the way the system should work. Otherwise, we are forcing our school districts to think in terms of how do we raise more money. in my mind, in my humble opinion, the superintendent's role is to make the school work, the school district work, and the board's role is to provide oversight. Nobody here should be in the role of trying to raise money or fundraising for the school district. Like, that's not something that should be happening. But we constantly get into that position of trying to figure out how we as a school district raise more money. That should be coming from the government.
And I also want to remind that there are like political patterns or events that happen that have unintended consequences for public schools. And so I'm part of a unified school district, Berkeley Unified, and we serve preschool through adult school. And for preschool, our preschool programs were negatively impacted because of transitional kindergarten. And we're just talking about people who have devoted their lives working with a particular age range. Now in Berkeley, because we had transitional kindergarten, it kept us afloat in terms of attendance. And so we were able to keep schools open. Whereas you might hear in the media and right now what's happening in California, our schools are closing just because we don't have numbers. In our case in Berkeley Unified, we've been able to just maintain our schools thanks to TK. But at the same time, we lost a preschool. And we're also losing our Head Start programs in the federal government. So those are some unintended consequences where there's gains, but there's also losses. We have some loss. For our adult school program, it gets paid by the state. And the only thing that's keeping our adult school like afloat are adults who want to learn how to speak English. Now, there's also correlation to those who feel safe to go to school. And because we have this ICE, with like just this unfortunate things that are happening in our community, there are adult learners who don't feel comfortable going to our adult school programs, and we've seen a drop in enrollment. And so just keep in mind that not only do we have to keep our budget based on attendance, but things that happen in our community definitely can have a negative impact in serving our services.
And I just wanted to add one point over here was that as we base this on enrollment, what also happens is the school district has fixed costs. And the fact that you have a change in enrollment and change in funding, your fixed costs don't automatically go away. So then you're having to deal with letting go staff that are really, really important, counselors, teachers, and also sometimes school closures. And creating a school is a big deal. Having to close some down is a massive impact to the community because you may never be in that place where you can rebuild that school again. So this way of thinking is really problematic, and I think the community should wake up to that and speak to their representatives about how we are, as CJ said, like priorities. Budget is a reflection of our priorities. Well, the government's budget also is a reflection of the government's priorities. Is education not a high enough priority? Why are the school districts having to constantly worry about funding?
We just adopted our budget for the coming year yesterday, and it includes a school closure. Regina, I appreciate you bringing up shifting and changes of the funding. Hayward School District lost millions of dollars from Hayward Promise Neighborhoods. It was a federal grant through the Department of Education that the current administration rescinded. And Ganesh, to your point, it funded everything from counselors to support staff to family engagement to teachers. And it was literally here one day and gone the next. And then came Christmas Eve. Like it was a terrible rollout. And so that's really what we're seeing. And then we are left having to figure out how do we fund the folks that are doing this work today? And then are we able to sustain their jobs when we do our next budget cycle?
Yeah. Thank you for this really information-packed discussion about where schools get their money from and where schools use their money, and oftentimes when schools do not have enough money. School closures have been brought up a few times, so let's go there and explore that a little bit more. So, right, there's lots of discussions, as multiple panelists have mentioned, about school closures in the Bay Area, school closures in other places in California. So can you talk more about patterns related to school closures, right, where school closures are happening and what's causing these school closures?
I'm happy to go. It may not be the common answer. I think school closures should be a last resort. There's a common saying among folks that serve on school boards that we should be focusing on keeping cuts furthest away from the classroom. School closures is literally cutting classrooms. It's cutting teachers, custodians, principals, support staff. And without a thorough plan for where those students end up, where those families are welcomed to, we often end up losing them to neighboring districts, to charters. And so really just reconsidering if you close a school and then you lose the majority of those students don't re-enroll into a new school site, you've now seen declining enrollment and you've closed a school, and perhaps your budget is in no better place than where you left it. And so I think there's other opportunities to really look at cuts, and school closures should be last. I think it's important to note that it takes 3 people on a 5-member board to provide that direction to your superintendent. And then the really scary thing about a school closure is it leaves a vacant school site. And vacant school sites by law, if you are not using them, and you can't use them for storage, but if you're not using them for programming for students, it needs to be made available for the public, which sounds great. But what we find there, not only does it often become rental space to congregations that are not always welcoming and affirming for all of our families, it also could become a charter school, meaning that you've now closed a school, it becomes a charter school that now steals your students, and then you now have more declining enrollment. You then potentially close another school that becomes another charter school. And this is the domino that destroys public education.
I think another element, Austin, and thank you for sharing that perspective, is the challenge of what happens when you close that school is also, let's say that the school district didn't have somebody fill it and you were going to sell the property. Well, if you sell that property, let's just say for conversation's sake, you were going to get $15 million for that piece of property. The state mandates that those $15 million can only go into a restricted fund for facility and structural improvements. It cannot be used to offset your general operating costs where we're seeing the deficits in the budget. The other component is what happens in 10 or 15 years if your enrollment trend changes. School districts are not equipped to go back out and buy property on the open market in most cases. So it is a really difficult challenge. The other thing that I think is an important consideration, I think all of us would agree we would like to avoid school closures when possible, but they sometimes become a necessity, is how big is the school? There's a benefit that comes from, if you just look at an elementary school, having 2 third-grade classes, because not all third graders in one school should be in the same class based on creating an equitable balance of students in classrooms. You also then have more than one teacher who can collaborate with the other third-grade teacher about what's the best practice for teaching fractions. So there's a number of elements that all have to be considered in that regard. So it's a really complicated issue, and I agree with Austin's sentiments that it's a last resort. It's not something that we want to be looking at early in the budgetary process because the implications are significant and long-lasting.
As someone who just did it, it's a traumatic experience for students and families as well. And it should never be where it just pops up. This is, to me, it should be a multi-year conversation, because what you want to tell those students, families, and staff is that we still love you. We still care about you. We are going to celebrate the heck out of you when you get to your new site. And that only is done by that constant feedback and reassurance that we are going to hold you through this process.
Yes. All right. Ganesh or Regina, do either of you want to jump in?
I'll go after. Yeah.
Go ahead, Regina. I'll speak after you. You're in the screen.
Yeah. So in Emeryville, we had a thriving working class, multi-generational community that just disappeared in like a 15-20 year period. Just the cost of living in the East Bay and families we witnessed them move to Fresno, Dublin. In fact, I think Dublin was like the fastest growing school district in the state of California. Like they're building schools and they have land. Fresno was growing as well. So there's you might hear from us where like school closures, but there's like sites in California where they're building schools. Anywho, so many of our families are gone, and in Emeryville, we have one elementary, one middle, one high school. And what happened was we got creative. I'll say that. We ended up building a Emeryville Center for Community Life, which was a partnership with the city. And so I'd say a third of it gets used by the city, like the field or the pool, or like there's like a rec center, a community center, and then the rest are like classrooms. So it's one hub, and we're a very small school district, so it's elementary, middle school, high school. Our former elementary site, Anna Yates Elementary, we ended up renting it out to a private international school for, I think it's like German. And right next to us, we're in the border of Oakland. Used to be North Oakland Community Charter School, which closed down in 2024, and it was empty. However, I believe it's like a Chinese immersion charter school just recently purchased it. And so now it's come back, 2 years later as a charter school. And so what Asa was describing, like when you have a charter school open, we're losing some of our students who want to join that one. But it's a charter school that's specialized in Chinese immersion school, so it attracts a certain population, right? Our German private school attracts a certain interest in population. And then there's our public school. So that's kind of what we're up against. We also have another site, which used to be our middle school, and we rent it out to the YMCA. And we've also decided to create like a special day school for preschool, TK, and kindergarten. So that way the facilities were age appropriate, especially like just given the space they needed and the services they needed, and access to spaces that were developmentally appropriate. And so that's how we're able to use some of our spaces. We have not sold any of our spaces. None of our spaces have become, the charter school was next door to us. It's technically in Oakland, even though it's like the next street. But our Emeryville spaces, we've been able to just rent them out and maintain them. But I'm definitely working hard on just advocating for workforce housing and using those spaces for that. And that's a whole other topic, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to add that while this even closing of schools feels like a financial decision and a practical financial decision that the board has to take, we must look at whom that affects. And really, it's the most vulnerable communities that are affected in a very simple way. If you have a school, local school that's like, 3 or 4 minutes walking distance from your place, and you are working class and you have to drop your kids and move, get to your work fast. Now, all of a sudden, that local school is gone. And now you have to take your child to a much farther location. And for those 5-10 minutes or that transportation that may not be available in the morning, those are the communities that are hurt the most. And also sometimes that particular school might have a special program. It might have a Spanish immersion program. It might have some special programs that are created. And now the school district has also got to think about, can they continue that program? Maybe that program goes away. Maybe that program was helping vulnerable communities that don't have a voice normally. And when the school is gone, that program may also go with it. So really, we need to think about who this is affecting the most when these school closures happen.
Yeah. Thank you for those answers as well. To change topics a little bit, we're still talking about budget. A kind of similar question that I asked about the district governance, right? Many members of the public, parents, community members, labor leaders want to have a say and want to be involved in issues of school finance, both school district finance issues as well as sometimes state finance and those state dollars issues around that. So, what advice would you have to members of the public who want to get involved? And what are some ways that members of the public can get involved in issues around school district budgeting and the money that our school districts have and spend?
So in Berkeley Unified, where I'm a teacher and the union vice president, we have what we call a superintendent's budget advisory committee, and it actually started just I think during the recession. And so we have representation. I think it's like 4 votes or 4 seats for community, 4 for labor, and then it's the superintendent and their district's team, including the financial director. And it's 20 voting members. So there's like maybe it's not 4, it's like 8 or something. But it's transparency. We all are given the same information. We all get to ask questions. We're educating the same time of what buckets we have, what buckets are empty, where we can move monies. And so it really works for transparency, and everyone gets, buy-in, and all the stakeholders are involved. So that's something that Berkeley was able to do. And especially at a time where, no one wants to like lay off like folks or close schools or ended programs that students thrive. So it was a decision that made in 2008 because of the recession, and we've kept it since. And it's been really, really helpful to make these tough decisions. So whatever recommendations we make, we present to the board, and then the board votes. So that's what happens in Berkeley.
I think the most important thing to remember is that the superintendent provides a recommended budget, a proposed budget for adoption by their boss, which is the elected school board. And the majority of their bosses, so the majority of the school board, needs to agree as one voice that this is the direction that we want you to proceed in. These are the changes that we want you to make. School boards can also do really open-ended things that make CJ's job even more difficult than it already is. With unrealistic asks or 14 different directions that don't really provide any one set of directions, but that's not helpful. And so that's really where a school board working closely with labor partners, with community, with each other, and really figuring out where there's an opportunity for compromise is, I think, how we get some clear direction to the superintendent to make changes from the first proposal that's proposed to what the board then ends up adopting.
And I'll just add, and I appreciate those perspectives. I think going back to how you can become involved in attending board meetings, we're required by law each year to adopt our budget and our local control accountability plan, our LCAP. And those happen in two meeting cycles. So we're required by law to have a hearing at a public meeting regarding the LCAP and the budget. And then they come back again. And as Austin pointed out so well, that is a place where the staff of the school district can receive direction on, let's make an adjustment here, let's make an adjustment there, let's reprioritize here. So it really is a place where you can see transparently what's happening with the school district's budget.
The other thing I might add there, not necessarily operationing from the board, but in terms of advocacy is definitely advocacy with elected officials. And I go back to CJ's point earlier about IDEA funding as a perfect example. If you know anybody who's running for Congress today in your area, they should be talking about IDEA funding as part of their campaign. I mean, let's make sure that our elected officials know that this is an issue and that they need to be working on. I know that in the past there have actually been bills in Congress that are, fully fund or funded at the 40% that haven't gone anywhere. So if someone's running for office, they should be promising to go support that bill. People who are running for Congress should, for example, understand that getting the IDEA funding is important for our local areas. And similarly, even at the state level, there's a lot of devil in the details. Like you may see some high-level governor's budget numbers, but trying to see what those mean at your local district, attending board meetings where these are discussed is also helpful, because we do have, depending on the LCFF funding, it may feel like the state is providing a lot, but your particular district may not be actually receiving as much as you thought they're receiving. So it's important to understand how those are playing out.
I do just also need to add, I think school board members and candidates for school board need to be able to get beyond the argument that the school funding formula is broken. We all know it is. And there are perhaps small opportunities to fix that, but the huge shift that's necessary to fully fund special education at the federal level, I think we all know the world that we're in right now. It's not a realistic ask. And so it's things I want to see from folks that are running for local, state, and federal office is, how do we partner with other jurisdictions? How do we help make sure that we're passing our parcel taxes, our bond measures, working with our labor partners, working with our trades, uplifting opportunities for students to get into cool programming so they don't leave districts for charter schools? That's the kind of stuff that I want to see candidates also talking about.
Oh, there, I'm unmuted now. And as we close this discussion on district budgeting out, I want to really uplift something that Regina said, a really concrete thing that people can do. As Regina was saying, and I believe in Berkeley, many districts have bond oversight or budget task forces, and oftentimes you can find information about those on the district website or on board agendas. And so if district budgeting is something that you're really interested in, you can go to those meetings. Sometimes there's even vacancies on those committees and on those task forces. And that's one thing that really pro public education, community members, parents, labor leaders, sometimes even students, some districts have seats for students, like high school students, can do to get involved in district budgeting. So now we will transition to some Q&A from the audience and some audience questions. So we're probably going to bounce around a little bit topic to topic. So our first question is this. When the local community does not feel supported by decisions made by the school board majority, how do you suggest supporters or staff realistically encourage them to maintain trust and to stay engaged?
I think the answer is come to your local school board meeting. And dare I say, you should attend one school board meeting a year, and you should stay for the duration. It's very often like we pass our budget and then everyone walks out of the room and then you're like, but the consent calendar has like 14 things that we're purchasing today that perhaps we don't have to, but there's now no one in the audience to say that. And so attend a school board meeting once a year, at least.
I concur with that statement, Austin. I think that the important part is if you don't feel supported by a decision that the board makes as a majority or even as superintendent, there are people who disagree with decisions that I make. I think we have a responsibility as professionals, as elected officials, where we can have conversations about why we made a decision. And to me, if there's disagreement about the decision, that's one thing. But as superintendent, I always want to be able to say, here's the rationale, here's the information, here's the process I used. This is how I ended up at this decision. Now, you may disagree with it, but I do think there can be trust when there is understanding about, I'm willing to be transparent about how I arrived at my decision, because I think there can still be trust within a disagreement. And that's a component that I think really well-functioning districts and governance teams can have those conversations in the public meeting. Maybe somebody does vote yes, or somebody does vote no on the board. But when we can have that conversation of, I'm willing to support this because, or I'm not willing to vote yes on this because, I think that level of transparency can still retain trust, even though there might be a disagreement with the decision. And the more you're in the boardroom, in the meetings, I think the more you can see and hear and feel that conversation, as opposed to reading or hearing about a decision that was made that only captures the tally of the vote.
I would encourage to visit board members during their office hours, assuming there are office hours. And I'm also curious of what's going to happen next, given the new law that board members can only abstain if it's a conflict of interest. So now you're going to hear a lot more no's. And I'd said my first no recently. And so, and everyone was surprised. I'm like, did you guys not read the new law? But so you're going to get, it's just all the more reason to meet up with your board members during their office or open office hours or whatnot. And the agenda goes out prior to the meeting. And so I would encourage you to open up that agenda and check it out and read it and ask some questions. And there's, again, we mentioned this earlier, there are committees, not just parcel tax committees, but there's other committees that you should start getting involved and put yourself out there. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say like specific to that question, I've been there. I felt like not supported by the board majority. But I think the thing to realize is these are people, and again, they are volunteering on their time, and it's possible that there are certain issues on which they're real people we can go speak at board meetings. We can question what they are, the decisions that they're making. We can engage with them offline and really try to move them in the right direction. But also the fact that you are engaging, you're meeting other community members in those board meetings, advocating for those issues. Well, when the next election comes around, you can maybe even run for the same position or ask somebody else to run for that same position. But that organization also helps. If you walk away from a school board that doesn't seem to be supporting you and you're actually giving up the opportunity to engage and make a difference even more. So I would say trust the system. Definitely trust the fact that at their core, all the board members are normally trying to do the right thing. They may just not agree with you on specific things, which is why they may have voted in a certain way. But most of them are really putting in an effort to do the right thing by the community.
And I just want to remind about the Brown Act. And so community members can speak to all the board members, but the board members can't speak to each other about these issues in case many people don't know that. They just assume that we all hang out and to talk, like we're not like a book club where we could discuss it. We do have closed session, but prior to that, we can't discuss these things. And so it's actually great for us to meet with constituents and families and whatnot, because you have the opportunity to speak to everyone, unlike us. And something else, when someone mentioned about running, you have to remember that you run as an individual, right? You're putting yourself out there running for school board. But in the end, like you are the front and you're on the dais as a collective, but you can't communicate with each other. So it's a very like nuanced like relationships that we have with each other. So yeah.
I think that's a great
I
point,
would
Regina.
also-
Go ahead, Austin.
No, Regina, I appreciate you bringing up the Brown Act. I think clarification, it's the you can't engage the majority of a board, can't have a conversation.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
And then there's like weird serial meeting things, but the Brown Act is often used as a way to tell folks that we can't respond to you via email. That is not in the Brown Act. And so if you email every school board members can respond individually. There is some advocacy language that tries to get one person, usually the board president, to respond. Just BCC the full board. Then, frankly, every board member should respond to you, and that's their opportunity to at least confirm receipt and acknowledge that you took the time to reach out.
And I think one thing I was going to say, a unique aspect of the not necessarily the Brown Act, but I think a condition that is created because of the Brown Act. A lot of members come to school board, community members, they come to school board meetings ready to participate, ready to kind of have a dialogue in what feels like a community forum or a community meeting. And one thing we often remind people is it's not a community meeting in the sense of a traditional town hall. We describe it as this is the meeting of the Board of Education, but this meeting happens in front of the public. And so that's why we have such a structured process for here's how you give public comment on the agenda items. Here's how you give public comment on items that are not on the agenda tonight. And that sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get used to the flow of that as a community member who's coming into the meeting. You're giving your public comment. Some boards, some circumstances, they may give a response. Others may not, but it is important to kind of just keep in your mind, this is the meeting of the board, which if you were in the private sector might happen behind closed doors without the public's watchful eye. But because of the Brown Act, and rightfully so, the meeting of the board happens in front of the public for the public vantage point. So I think it's a helpful reminder of context.
All right. So for time, I'll probably direct some of these next Q&A questions to one or two panelists. And then if you're sitting on the panel and the question is not directed to you, but you feel like you have really good insider information that hasn't been shared, feel free to jump in then. So our next question is for CJ. How are school districts kind of legally defined and created?
Yes. I don't definitively know, so I'm going to get out in front of my skis a little bit here, and I'd be happy if any of my colleagues on the panel can give me a correction or a guidance on this. My belief is historically these are set as established by the county. Now, there are a number of things that happen across school districts, across communities, which may change, and sometimes those are reflected in the name of the school district. For example, you might see the word union in a school district. That oftentimes means that two districts merged at some point in time. I think one consideration for this question is people often ask me, in San Ramon Valley Unified, we cover San Ramon, Alamo, Blackhawk, Diablo, Danville. I think maybe said Danville already. So we have a couple different jurisdictions. Where I was previously a superintendent in Fremont, it was the boundary of Fremont. That was inclusive of the whole district, one city, one school district. And those generally are set at the county level. And school districts can't say, well, I want to adjust our boundary a few city blocks this way for this purpose. There's a comprehensive ballot process, I believe, that has to go into that. So I don't have the perfect answer on that. That's a history lesson I should dive into a little bit more.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you so much for that. Now we have a question about special ed, which I guess I will not solely direct to one panelist. Is there any pathway to getting the federal government to pay a larger percentage of special ed funding, especially if there's a change in administration? And if so, what's the best way to advocate or engage around that?
Because I brought it up once, I'm going to mention it again. At the end of the day, the Congress has the power of the public purse, and all that Congress really needs to be able to fund something is votes. So if there are enough votes in Congress, they can pass a budget and fund whatever it is that they would like to fund, barring a potential veto by the president. So at the end of the day, the pathway to getting Congress to actually fund special ed fully in the way that they are mandated is to get them to get behind a bill, vote for it, and get that budget passed. Everything, all funding from the federal government is basically based on the Congress having the votes, passing a bill, and funding something.
I think it's yes, and the federal government is not going to do it today, probably not tomorrow, probably not next year. And so how can we make sure that our state is investing in programming, that our county office of ed is giving as much money as possible back to our local school districts, that the county structure is helping contribute, and then that if there's opportunities to engage families in the process, if we're able to create spaces where families with students who have special needs are able to come together and kind of talk it out amongst each other, districts are less likely to see lawsuits, see angry parents, because there's an opportunity for them to help solve the experience that they're going through and help navigate the process, and that saves districts money.
All right. So as we come up on time, I'm going to ask one last question. We'll just go down the kind of line and hear briefly from each of the panelists. So what's one thing that you want attendees to leave this webinar, kind of walk away from this webinar knowing about school districts and how school districts work?
The most important thing you can do is go to your local school board once a year at least. That is how we make sure that we elect good people to our school board who are making good decisions in the best interest of our students, families, and staff.
I want to add, we need champions of public schools more now than ever. If you yourself, I benefit from public education, whether it's from preschool to even college, and it is at a threat right now. And we definitely need everyone to help out. So I just encourage you to get involved. Thanks.
I would add, I think thanks for having me as a part of this panel. It's been great to be here with these wonderful people. I think what I would want people to know is along the same lines. Come out and get involved. See what's really happening in your school district. Don't believe some of the narrative that is being pushed out about what public schools are doing. Because if you're involved in the process, you're involved in the meetings, you may not agree with everything, but there is a truth there that is not being celebrated in many places and in many ways. And if you get involved, you're going to see A, the difference you can make as an individual, and B, I think you will start to see through a different lens of how incredible the people are who are choosing to spend their life dedicated to our future and our youth and our children. We have some of the most talented people in the world, and many people who are most critical of the work that we do in public schools. I can say, as a former fifth grade teacher, couldn't survive a week in my job as a fifth grade teacher. We need to continue to honor the profession and honor the work that happens. And the more you're involved in seeing the work, being a part of the conversation, I think you'll see how many amazing things are actually happening in school districts across the entire state.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And that's all. As we close out this panel, give our wonderful panelists one more round of applause. So a few things as we close out. We'll be putting up a slide which has information about how to contact Lift Up Public Schools. There we go, the slide's going up. If you enjoyed this panel, this is the first of a 3-part series where you will be able to hear from wonderful people who in our community who are education leaders and leaders in the space and learn even more from them. You can also sign up for our mailing list if you want to hear from Lift Up Public Schools about all of the things that we're up to, or even if you want to volunteer with our organization and get more involved that way. As you exit this webinar, you will be prompted to fill out a survey. We would appreciate it very much if you could fill out this post-attendee survey and give us some feedback about what you thought went well and the areas that you think that we could improve so that we can keep what's going well and change things to make our next 2 webinars even better. Thank you so much for attending and hearing from our lovely Thank you so much for attending and hearing from our lovely panelists tonight. Thank you for spending your evening with us.